More children than ever are being diagnosed with autism. 20 years ago, 1 in 150 kids had autism in this country. The CDC now says that number is 1 in 36 children. Do we know what's driving the increase?
It's affecting different demographics for the first time. CDC finding more than 1% of girls overall have autism. Predominantly, it's been found in boys, and certain minority groups reporting more cases of the disorder than ever before.
Autism, or autism spectrum disorder, also called ASD, is it becoming more common? I think one thing is for sure, we're hearing more about it than ever before.
Well, that's a shocking discovery. An even more shocking discovery is proposed by Dr. Bobby. Let's listen to it.
No child comes out with autism. It develops. It develops around 2 and the age 3. And when you start to think about the amount of toxicity they're getting and the type of foods they're getting.
Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a complex neurodevelopmental disorder that affects how a person perceives and interacts with the world. It's called a spectrum disorder because it manifests in a wide variety of ways, with a range of challenges and strengths from person to person. Do children ever grow out of autism?
Autism stems from differences in biology that have an influence on brain development. Autism is a lifelong condition. That doesn't mean that children can't make significant improvements in their language and social abilities over time. They can, just like all children, but children don't just grow out of autism.
It's said that people with autism have a great deal of empathy. Let's listen to the expert.
Autism can affect a person's ability to understand subtle emotional cues, such as tone of language or body language. But when emotions are communicated more directly, there's a wealth of evidence showing that children and adults on the spectrum are even more likely to feel empathy for others. Social interaction difficulties and anxiety can sometimes mean that making friends is a struggle. But this should never be confused with a lack of desire to have friendships. The vast majority of children and adults on the spectrum do like to socialise, and sometimes that just means socialising in a different way. It is true that around 10% of autistic people have skills such as maths or drawing that are of extraordinary ability. But this is really just a small proportion of the full numbers of individuals diagnosed with autism. It's best to look past this caricature and see the extraordinary human that lies beyond the diagnosis. There have been literally thousands of studies in this area, and all of them have found no association between vaccinations and autism. The assumption that people on the spectrum don't have a sense of humour is absolutely false. Probably the funniest conversations I've ever had have been with autistic kids and adults, and they absolutely run rings around me in telling jokes. There is no evidence that individuals on the spectrum are more violent than the rest of the population. Many people on the spectrum are in wonderful, loving romantic relationships. Just like the rest of the community, not every person on the spectrum chooses to be in a romantic relationship, but that is not the same as not being capable of doing so. Many people on the spectrum have intellectual disabilities, and also many do not. Just because someone may have communication difficulties doesn't mean that they also have intellectual disabilities. What it means is that we have to assess intelligence in a different way, a way that doesn't rely so heavy on communication skills. Not every child will be great at maths, not every child will repeat back words, not every child will have difficulty speaking, and not every child will have hand mannerisms. Every child and adult on the autism spectrum is different, full of their own unique talents, personalities, and yes, challenges. The label autism doesn't mean one thing. What it is a gateway to understanding a whole new way of thinking about the world. And those children and adults are to be cherished for that fact.
You must be confused about Dr. Bobby's statement I shared earlier that no child is born with autism. You might be wondering how that's possible. Let's dive into it further.
It develops around 2 and the age 3. And when you start to think about the amount of toxicity they're getting and the type of foods they're getting, I mean, it starts with baby formula because most people unfortunately aren't breastfeeding anymore. The breast milk enforces their immune system. So if nobody's breastfeeding and then you're feeding your baby formula for the first year that isn't natural, and then they go straight into processed food, you got to understand how damaging that is for a 2 to 3 year period. For an adult like us, it's different when we're eating that. We have developed detoxification organs. We have a developed immune system, fully developed brain. But when you're eating this before your brain has even developed, your gut has fully developed, your immune system is fully developed, it's like setting all your wealth out on the porch. So you're bound to lose something. The unfortunate thing is the way we think about food in box cans, jars, bags, that's not food, but we've been duped into thinking that it is food.
While autism spectrum disorder, ASD, can be diagnosed around ages 2 to 3, research indicates that parents and healthcare providers often notice developmental differences at this age because children start to display more pronounced social, communicative, and behavioural patterns.
Most often, parents already know that their child has autism. They're just waiting for an expert to sit down with them and formally diagnose it. There are times where a parent doesn't know that's going on and comes into the appointment unaware of what it's called.
Now we just have one diagnosis called autism spectrum disorder. Previously, it was broken up into succinct categories, and the categories were to help people understand different levels and different functioning levels of kids and persons with autism. Now it's all one disorder, and then we talk about different severity levels and functioning levels.
Autism is sometimes the A word that you don't want to hear it because you think it's going to be terrible, but autism is a spectrum, and there are children that have just a little bit of autism and who are in the mild range.
So a low functioning person on the spectrum would have intense behaviors that are impeding their ability to be independent in their life, little to no communication skills, unable to interact with other people and their environment without additional supports. Then you're going to have the higher functioning level spectrum. So in the past it used to be called Asperger's disorder. People who have more of the stereotypic behaviors, repetitive interests, but their communication skills are there. They can communicate with other people, they can interact with others, but they still have some challenges and some barriers in those areas.
So difficulty with socializing with other kids, repetitive behaviors, such as toe walking, rocking, spinning. Those are the classic signs. The kids who are classically autism, you can almost diagnose right in the waiting room as soon as you greet them. They're fairly obvious, and pediatricians are generally good at identifying those.
If they're a young child, some of the things that you want to look for are a lack of eye contact, lack of being able to engage in pretend play. So for example, if you have a toddler and they are not interacting with baby dolls, they're not really using them to try to play, pretend to rock them or put them to bed. Another one would be social interaction. So oftentimes they prefer to be alone as opposed to be with other people. They don't start interacting with other kids. We call that parallel play, moving to more of an interactive play. They prefer to just continue to stay solitary.
Many kids with autism spectrum disorder have these heightened sensitivities to things tactile, things auditory, things olfactory and thermal.
A study published in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders found that many parents report concerns about their child's development by the age of 18 months. But more definitive symptoms become apparent around 2 to 3 years old, which is when formal diagnoses are typically made. Now you might be wondering what you can expect during autism assessment. Let's listen to experts.
This film has been made to help you understand what will happen when you come to meet us. We are a team that meets with children and young people who may be finding it hard to understand how other people think and feel. They may also find it hard to talk about their own thoughts and feelings. When young people feel like this, it can make it harder to get on at school and with friends. So our job is to see if there's an explanation for why you feel this way and if there is advice that can help and support you at home and at school. When we meet you, we will find out about some of the things you are good at, the things that you enjoy doing, the things that might be harder for you, and the things that you would like to be different. You will be asked to come along with your parents or carers. At first, you will all be invited into a room to meet the 2 clinicians. This is what we call the people that work in our team. Your parents or carers will then be invited into a different room whilst you stay with one of the clinicians. Don't worry, the person meeting with you will just be trying to get to know you a little bit by doing some activities together. They will also ask you some questions about school, friendships and feelings.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, notes that while autism can sometimes be detected at 18 months or younger, most children receive a diagnosis after age 2, when behavioural characteristics of autism are more noticeable. Some research suggests a potential link between environmental factors, including exposure to toxins, and the development of autism. For example, studies have looked at the effects of prenatal and early life exposure disorder to environmental toxins, such as heavy metals and certain chemicals found in food, and their potential association with ASD.
Teeth are like a biologic hard drive. They form layers just like growth rings in a tree. So every day we are depositing a new layer of tooth material, and it's capturing all this information from our environmental exposures, our nutritional exposures, and many other factors. This technology that we have developed relies on baby teeth. Every child is going to shed 20 of their teeth. We can use their basic physiology to reconstruct an entire history of exposure. So we have to use special instruments like lasers to go and sample within these rings. We were able to go back in time from children who had autism and their siblings, their identical twins in some cases, who did not, and say, well, when did this difference start and what was the exact chemical that was different? How were they different even before they were born? What we found here is that higher levels of certain toxicants like lead, as well as deficiency of certain nutrients like manganese and zinc, can lead to autism, but there are specific windows, specific critical periods when we are more susceptible to these environmental hits.
Genetic factors are determined at birth. Environmental factors can change.
We could also figure out the most susceptible time period or the critical windows when in our development environmental stressors can set us on a trajectory that may lead to autism.
A review article in Environmental Health Perspectives discusses the role of various environmental exposures, including dietary factors, in the development of neurodevelopmental disorders like autism. It suggests that exposure to certain chemicals in food might contribute to the risk of developing ASD in genetically susceptible individuals.
Touch my finger, touch your nose, touch my finger.
Dr. Martha Herbert is a pediatric neurologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. She's directing a large research study on toxic chemicals in the environment and their impact on brain development, including autism.
The genes load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger.
For years, scientists have believed that autism was genetically based, but Dr. Herbert believes environmental factors can either trigger or worsen the illness. She says finding those elements early in life and changing them could determine the severity of the disease.
There's a system in the body called the detoxification system. Detoxification is another variant. So in detoxification, you get rid of things that you don't want, either your body's own waste products or things that get in, which you really don't want to have around. It can be air pollution. It can be plastics in the food. It can be the pesticides that are in so many of our products.
Dr. Herbert's research involves babies, school-aged children, and adults with and without autism. She's trying to find out how the brain becomes autistic and at what point. She's been following Kenzie and Cooper, brothers who don't have autism. Like others in her study, she tests them regularly for toxic chemicals, brain imaging changes, and developmental disorders. Jamie Fanella, a research coordinator, is testing Cooper.
I want you to use these blocks and make a picture that looks just like this one.
My personal commitment is to test, and if it's true, then to show that the influence of chemicals on the brain is not just on development, but it's on the whole, it's on your whole life.
Super.
Dr. Herbert is not alone in looking at the environment. Dr. Larry Silver is a professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical Center in Washington. He's been researching learning disabilities for more than 40 years. He says he knows enough to be concerned about toxic chemicals in the environment.
We've had increasing concern that the environmental toxins may be contributing to these disabilities and also to the increase in these disabilities.
In the U.S., nearly 3 million people have been diagnosed with autism. While in 1994, 1 in every 1,000 children was diagnosed with the disease, today there is 1 for every 110. Jeff Sell at the Autism Society says numbers around the world are similar.
Genetics alone cannot explain that type of increase in prevalence.
2 of Sell's 4 children are autistic, even though there's no family history.
My boys both have high mercury levels, lead, PCBs.
For many years, advocates for autism patients believe the disease was caused by vaccinations, especially the measles vaccine. But several studies have found no link between vaccines and autism. Now, Sell and the Autism Society are pressing to update legislation on toxic chemicals. He says there are more than 82,000 chemicals being released into the environment, but there's good information on only 200. He says we're damaging not only the human population, but the world we live in.
There is also research investigating the role of nutrient deficiencies in the development of autism. For example, deficiencies in essential fatty acids, vitamins and minerals during critical periods of brain development might contribute to the risk of developing autism. A review article in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience discussed how deficiencies in omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D and other essential nutrients might be linked to neurodevelopmental disorders, including autism. The authors suggested that improving diet quality and addressing nutrient deficiencies could potentially reduce autism risk.
And he and I now think that probably 35 or 40% of cases of autism are genetic. But the evidence is also beginning to build that there is a substantial fraction, we still don't know the exact number, of cases of autism and other learning disabilities that are due to chemical exposures, especially chemical exposures very early in life. There's really two lines of evidence that bring us to that conclusion that chemicals contribute to learning disabilities. The first is that there have been a whole series of studies which show that the developing human brain is exquisitely sensitive to toxic chemicals in the environment. We know that lead, methyl mercury, PCBs, which are polychlorinated biphenyls, certain pesticides, certain plastics chemicals can cause learning disabilities in children. We've learned this through careful studies of human babies whom we followed over the years, and then the studies in human babies have been buttressed by animal studies in the laboratory. The second line of evidence is that research has shown that there are several classes of chemicals that can directly cause babies to become autistic. It's been shown that exposure of the human fetus in the 6th or 7th or 8th week of pregnancy to a medication called thalidomide can cause autism. There's another drug called misoprostol, and there's a third drug called valproic acid. If exposure to any of those takes place in the first trimester of pregnancy, there's a high rate of autism. None of those particular drugs that I've just mentioned are driving the autism epidemic. None of them are very widely used in this country. But the fact that they can cause autism demonstrates proof of principle that chemical exposures in early life can cause autism. And so it's on the basis of these two lines of evidence, the recognition that the brain is exquisitely vulnerable to toxic chemicals, the recognition that certain classes of chemicals can cause autism. That's why we have launched the Autism and Learning Disabilities Discovery and Prevention Project at Mount Sinai. Well, there's been a great deal of talk, especially on the internet, that vaccines cause autism. And in response, and that perception arose from the observation that there have been these terribly sad cases of children who receive a vaccine and then 2 or 3 days later, or even the same day, develop symptoms of autism. There are cases out there where this has been observed. As a consequence of those observations and the great anxiety that parents develop, very justifiable anxiety that they developed in the aftermath of those cases, researchers around the world have undertaken studies to look at the possible links between vaccines and autism. In this country, the Centers for Disease Control has done studies. Studies have been done by researchers in England, in Scandinavia, in Japan. There have been a total of 12 or 15 studies around the world that have looked at the question. None of them, 0, have found any hint of a connection between vaccines and autism.
Research has explored the potential link between exposure to heavy metals, such as mercury and lead, and the development of autism. Some studies suggest that dietary sources of these metals could contribute to autism risk. A study published in Environmental Health Perspectives examined the levels of heavy metals in the blood of children with autism and found higher levels of certain metals compared to neurotypical children. The researchers suggested that exposure to these metals, potentially through diet, might be associated with autism. Some studies have examined the effects of gluten-free and casein-free (GFCF) diets on children with autism. These studies often focus on symptom management rather than causation.
My son is Noah. He just turned 8. He is amazing. I brought his picture down here so you could see him. He is so cute.
Melissa Cantabrana glows when she talks about her son Noah, the vibrant little boy you see in these photos. For most of his life, Noah has been dealing with autism, diagnosed when he was 2 years and 9 months old.
Since then, we worked tirelessly about 8 hours a day in therapy.
It's a diagnosis his mom would later connect to the food he ate as a baby. Legacy brands of infant food found to contain neurotoxic heavy metals like lead, arsenic, and cadmium. The thought first occurred to her after reading about a bombshell congressional report published this past year, condemning the baby food industry for knowingly selling products with potentially harmful ingredients.
I was just like blown away. I was like, what the heck? I like instantly knew. It was like, this is it. This is what I'm talking about.
So, Melissa Cantabrana decided to take the industry's top manufacturers to court. It's a first-of-its-kind case that intends to establish a causal link between toxic heavy metals in baby food and autism and ADHD.
For example, a study published in Nutritional Neuroscience reported improvements in autism symptoms in children following a GFCF diet. The researchers suggested that the removal of gluten and casein might help reduce gastrointestinal problems and behavioral symptoms in some children with autism.
I mean, who suspects that there is potent neurotoxins in their baby food?
Pedram Esfandiari represents Melissa Cantabrana in this unprecedented case. The legal action is taking on an army of industry Goliaths like Gerber, Walmart, and Beechnut. A scathing 41-page complaint alleges the companies wreaked havoc on the health of children.
We've counted at least 20 attorneys for the defendants. We've got to assume that they have very deep pockets and powerful interests. How does that shape your game plan?
It honestly instills more confidence in us. I'm not concerned about the fact that these guys are Goliaths. All that matters is what the truth is and what the science says and what the facts say. And the facts say that these metals should never have been in baby food.
A key step in their case took place virtually this month. The court required Esfandiari to demonstrate that there is enough science on this issue to proceed to a jury trial. The judge heard from a panel of 4 experts who testified that heavy metals in baby food can cause autism spectrum disorder and ADHD.
This is the first time that this kind of data has been scrutinized under oath. What are your expectations?
I feel very confident. The data is truly overwhelming here. We're talking about toxic heavy metals, lead, mercury, and arsenic. These are well-known potent neurotoxins that have no business in a human body.
None of the attorneys for the baby food industry we contacted responded to our requests for interviews. They argued in court that there are no existing scientific studies that have attempted to directly link autism to the consumption of baby food. Esfandiari says his experts can, and if this goes to trial, he expects a fierce battle against a powerful industry.
Honestly, I expect to see, unfortunately, the same playbook we've seen with tobacco that Monsanto used with pesticides.
For now, as the attorneys argue their case in court, Noah's mom says she's constantly reminded of what's at stake every time she goes to the store and sees baby food sitting on the shelves.
There's no label on there that says, hey, this has really high levels of lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic. Come on, arsenic in baby food? They need to be held responsible for this.
Dr. Bobby Price, a health and healing expert who focuses on a holistic perspective, made a video on how to improve children's health through diet and lifestyle changes.
20 to 25% of kids today are obese. I won't even get into the conversation of obese and overweight, but 20 to 25%. Fatty liver disease, which was a disease that was specific to alcoholics back in the day. But today we're starting to see children with fatty liver disease, okay? We're starting to see children with the early signs of not only elevated cholesterol, but heart disease. And I'm talking about children that are in their early teens. We're starting to see this uptick and rise exponentially in autism. And just to give you a little bit of, some statistics, if you go back to 1980, 1 out of every 10,000 children was diagnosed with autism. And if you think about today, that number is somewhere around 1 out of every 36 or 34, okay? And they're predicting in 2050 that it's going to be 1 out of every 2. So if you have 4 kids, 2 of them will have autism.
In the video, Dr. Price argues that our children are unhealthier than ever before. He cites statistics such as a 20 to 25% obesity rate and an increase in fatty liver disease and early signs of heart disease in children. He also blames the rise in ADHD medications and depression rates on poor diet. Dr. Price lays out 8 ways to improve your child's diet and health.
But it's also really important to understand that there are things that you can do at home as a parent, as an aunt, as an uncle, as a godmother, godfather, you name it. No matter how you're involved in a child's life, I think this is why this video will also be important. And also, another big thing, ADD. And look at how many kids are on medications. And these medications for ADD are powerful drugs. They're not just the kind of drugs you just pop a pill and then you just walk away and there's no side effects.
1. Don't get your kids addicted in the first place. According to Dr. Bobby in the video, processed foods and sugary drinks are designed to be addictive and can easily hook children into wanting more. He emphasizes that avoiding these foods from the beginning is the most important step. He recommends not buying processed foods or sugary drinks and avoiding commercials that promote them.
The number one way you could do that is don't get them addicted in the first place. You have to say no to all the commercials, there's a reason why McDonald's has a kids Happy Meal with a toy in it, and they're targeting them with colors. There's a really good reason. Okay, so you have to be the gatekeeper for your child. The most important thing you could do is don't get them addicted in the first place. Because I'll tell you, it is going to be very difficult to shift somebody's taste buds away from something that is designed to be addictive in the first place, okay? And the reason why I'm using the word addictive, because it is no different. Just think about it. Whenever you take that food away from your child, they literally have an outburst. They literally will decide to starve themselves instead of eat the healthy food that you're trying to put in front of them, okay? But the most important thing is that they're watching you too. So they're looking at your behavior and what you're eating. And this is why I always tell parents, the first thing we give our kids is genetics. The second thing we give them is our habits. So you can't tell them to eat their greens and you're not eating your greens, okay? You have to be the first example for them. If you're eating hot Takis and hot dogs and all of this food that is a level 1 carcinogen, bologna meat, turkey meat, making sandwiches with it, Lunchables, all of this kind of meat is a level 1 carcinogen. This is why the rates of cancers have gone through the roof for children. Okay, so it's hugely important to understand, don't get them addicted in the first place.
2. Be a good role model. Children mimic their parents' behavior. So if you eat healthy foods, they are more likely to follow.
Secondarily, they're going to mimic your behavior, okay? All right, so you cannot hold them accountable for something you don't hold your own self accountable for, all right?
3. Switch everything to real food. Dr. Bobby says that switching everything to real food means avoiding processed foods and school lunches, and instead cooking meals at home from scratch. This may require some planning and meal prep, but it's important to offer your children healthy options.
The next one is switch to real food, everything real food. This probably means that you can't allow a school to feed your kids. This probably means that you need to make real meals, okay? Only eat at places that provide real food, okay? And this is gonna be difficult because if you have not did number 1, prevented them from getting addicted to it, frankenfoods, then they're gonna be irritated and you're gonna see the signs of withdrawal, which is irritation, which is, these outbursts, which is willing to starve themselves, which is sneaking out at night in the middle of the night to grab things that shouldn't be in the house in the first place, okay? That's why I always tell parents, if your kids are sneaking away to get food and it's in the house if they got to sneak and get it, then it should be there in the first place.
4. Transition them with smoothies. According to Dr. Bobby, Smoothies are a sneaky way to get kids to consume fruits and vegetables. This is because kids may be more likely to drink a smoothie than they are to eat plain fruits and vegetables. Smoothies can be a fun and easy way to introduce new fruits and vegetables to your child's diet.
Is it. All right. The next one, transition them with smoothies. Okay. Transition them with smoothies. And the reason why I say that is because you can make a smoothie taste really good by using a nice combination of fruits and a little bit of, nice vegetation in there as well too. Now, when they see it, they may not like the color. Let's say if it's a green smoothie. But when they taste it, and if it tastes good, it gets their brain to say, okay, greens may not be that bad. Okay, so now you could try a salad. And in that salad, you can add some tasty things to it, like some cut up dates, some caramelized walnuts, whatever it may be. Okay, you can make a nice salad dressing for them. Okay, you'll be able to transition them. But smoothies are one of the best things you can transition kids with. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is in just a second. But getting them in the habit of drinking a smoothie that has multiple food groups that are going to be very nutritional for the child. So you're packing and loading down this child with vitamins, minerals, trace elements, healthy fats, etc. Now you're getting them to get a lot of that nutrition that they haven't been getting in the first place. So transition them with smoothies, all right?
5. Take them to a farm. Help them connect with their food by showing them where it comes from.
The next thing is take them to a farm to actually see real food. I can't tell you the joy I get when I do my farm tours during my retreat and I'm able to see young people see food on the tree for the first time. Like, most people have only seen food at the supermarket. They've never seen it grown before. And so to see adults and kids get joy out of seeing, like, this is the process, this is where it starts, it connects them with their food. Okay, so we need to reconnect our children with our food. We need to reconnect ourselves with our food. All right, and I think we can do that if you start to actually let them see what real food looks like. Okay.
6. Introduce exotic fruits. Dr. Bobby recommends introducing exotic fruits to make fruits more appealing for children. He explains that because exotic fruits are different in appearance and taste compared to common fruits, they can pique a child's curiosity and interest. This can be a fun way to get them to consume more fruits, which are an important source of vitamins and nutrients for a healthy diet.
The next thing, exotic fruits. Okay, as you know, I am a lover and connoisseur of exotic fruits. I own a tropical fruit farm. I'm co-owner of I Heart Fruit Box, the letter I Heart Fruit Box. And you can get soursop, mamey, sugar apple, mangosteen, key limes. The list goes on and on, okay? And everything you get from us is seeded, seasonal, and grown in a natural fashion. No pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, grown clean. And the reason why I say this next one is important is because not only are exotic fruits going to be attractive to the eye of a child because they look different, they taste different, they taste real, but also this is going to be the new dessert for your child. So instead of feeding them cake, cookies, and pies, now you can feed them exotic fruits. So check us out at I Heart Fruit Box. You're gonna love your next fruit box, okay? And please, if you show the kids with the fruits, do a video, make sure you tag us in it, all right? Next one, allow your kids to cook with you, okay? I think we're on number 7 now. Allow your kids to cook with you, okay? Make them part of the process. Allow them to have some say-so. And all right, you want this? All right, so we're gonna need this, this, and this. All right, give them options to choose for. Make them part of the process. I find that when you add kids to the process, all of a sudden, they feel like, they contributed and it's fun and they got to do it with you. So this is like a game changer, okay?
7. Watch documentaries about food and health. Dr. Bobby recommends several documentaries that you can watch with your kids. Watching these documentaries can be a fun and educational way to learn more about healthy eating habits.
Number 7. Watch some documentaries, okay? I think this is important because, I moved back to the States from Japan and traveling the world in 2018, and either 2017 or 18, they came out with a documentary called What the Health. And it seemed like that one documentary shifted a lot of people. Just seeing what happens to animals, seeing how their food is actually made, and the lack of care and attention and all the chemicals that go into it. It seems like that was the spark that shifted and changed a lot of people. So I would highly recommend watching some documentaries with your kids and your family as well too. So a couple of great documentaries. Take Your Pills, okay? Because the last thing kids want to do is take pills. The last thing adults want to do is take pills. So that'll be a good one. Earthlings is a really good one. I think that's really good for kids. Another one is called Poison. You Are What You Eat, which I really like, because what they did was they took twins. They had one twin on a really healthy diet, one twin on an unhealthy diet. They have the same genetics, and you see how diet affects two different people who have the same genetic makeup. All they changed was the diet. So I think that's really important as well. So You Are What You Eat. The Game Changers is really good, especially if you have kids who are playing sports. Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead is another really good one. One of the first ones I watched and I loved. And another one is Unwell. So those are just a few documentaries. And then the last one, and this is something that I did with kids I mentor, even my son, is that volunteering. I used to take kids to volunteer, to give out food at shelters. We would make plates and give out kids to the homeless. Also getting kids to volunteer. They have volunteer programs where kids can go into the hospitals and see what sick kids look like, okay? I think that'll be a huge opportunity as well for kids.
Health is the greatest form of wealth we can pass down to the next generation. Ensuring they don't spend their golden years suffering from autism or riddled with disease and inflammation is one of the best legacies we can leave. We often focus on material things like money, houses or cars, but leaving behind good health is the greatest gift. What do you think? Let us know in the comments.